The sun had not yet crested the jagged ridgeline when the people of Dry Creek began to gather in the town square, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with the sharper tang of fear and anticipation. A makeshift gallows had been raised the night before, 4 sturdy posts lashed together with rawhide, a crossbeam of fresh-cut pine still weeping sap, and a single noose swaying gently in the pre-dawn breeze like a pendulum counting down to judgment. Lanterns flickered on porches and in hands, casting long shadows who had come to witness what they called justice. Eliza Thorne stood at the center of it all, her wrists bound behind her with coarse hemp rope that had already chafed her skin raw. Her ankles were shackled with iron that clanked softly every time she shifted her weight. The dress she wore, once a simple cream cotton she had mended countless times for her employer, was torn at the hem and stained with dirt from the jail cell where she had spent the last 3 days. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly, fell in tangled strands across her shoulders, and a bruise bloomed purple along her left cheekbone where the sheriff's deputy had struck her when she refused to confess. She did not cry. She did not beg. She simply stood, chin raised, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd, as if the noose and the murmuring voices meant nothing to her. The accusation had come swiftly and without mercy. Mr. Harlan Whitaker, the town's wealthiest merchant, had been found dead in his office 3 nights earlier, face down on his ledger with foam at his lips and an empty vial of arsenic beside him. The safe stood open, emptied of its cash, and the gold nuggets he kept as collateral. Eliza, who had worked as his housekeeper and sometimes clerk for 2 years, was the last person seen leaving the building. She had no family in Dry Creek, no one to speak for her, and her quiet ways had always made folks uneasy. She poisoned him, the whispers had started almost immediately. Took the money and tried to run before anyone noticed. Evidence was thin. A scrap of her apron found near the body, a neighbor who swore he saw her slip out after dark. But in a town hungry for order and retribution, thin evidence was enough. Sheriff Rudd, a broad-shouldered man with a mustache stained yellow from tobacco, stepped forward now, clearing his throat. The preacher, Reverend Hale, stood beside him clutching a worn Bible, his lips moving in silent prayer. The hangman, a wiry drifter named Otis who had arrived only the week before, tested the knot one last time and nodded. The crowd hushed as Rudd raised a hand. "Eliza Thorne," he intoned, voice carrying over the square, "you stand convicted by the good people of Dry Creek of the murder of Harlan Whitaker and the theft of his property. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out at dawn. Have you any last words?" Eliza's gaze shifted slowly to meet his. For a moment the only sound was the creak of the rope against the beam and the distant call of a mourning dove. Then she spoke, her voice low but steady, cutting through the stillness like a blade. "I did not kill him. I did not take his money, but you will hang me anyway because it is easier than admitting the real killer walks free among you." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some angry, some uneasy. A woman in the front row clutched her shawl tighter. A boy no older than 10 stared wide-eyed until his mother pulled him back. Rudd's face darkened. "Enough," he snapped. "The law has spoken." The hangman moved behind her, slipping the noose over her head and tightening it just enough that she felt the rough fibers bite into her throat. Eliza closed her eyes for only a second, drawing in one last breath of the cool morning air. She thought of the small kindnesses she had offered in this hard place, the food she had slipped to the half-starved boy who begged behind the livery, the way she had stood between the saloon girls and the drunks who grew too rough. None of it mattered now. The town had decided her fate, and dawn had come. Otis stepped back, hand on the lever that would drop the trap-door beneath her feet. Reverend Hale began to read from the Bible, his voice trembling. "The Lord is my shepherd." But before the final amen could fall, a gunshot cracked through the air, sharp, deliberate, echoing off the clapboard buildings. The crowd flinched as one, heads whipped toward the sound. From the eastern edge of the square, where the main road curved in from the Badlands, a lone rider emerged at a gallop. His horse was black as midnight, lathered and blowing hard, and the man in the saddle sat tall and unyielding, long duster coat flapping like raven wings. A second shot fired skyward, and the rider reined in sharply. dust boiling around the horse's hooves as he stopped 20 yards from the gallows. Silence swallowed the square. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The gunslinger, for no one doubted what he was, swept his hat back with one gloved hand. His face was shadowed by the brim, but the eyes beneath were pale and piercing, the color of winter sky. A scar ran from his left temple down to the corner of his mouth, giving his expression a permanent half-snarl. Twin revolvers hung low on his hips, and a Winchester rifle rested across his saddle pommel. He looked neither at the sheriff nor the preacher, but straight at Eliza. "She's mine," he said, voice carrying clear and calm across the stunned crowd. "My wife." A ripple of disbelief passed through the onlookers. Someone laughed nervously, then cut it short when no one joined in. Sheriff Rudd recovered first. "Who the hell are you, stranger?" "Name's Kane," the rider answered without looking away from Eliza. "And I've got papers to prove what I say." He reached slowly into his coat, every hand in the square twitching toward weapons, and withdrew a folded document, yellowed and official-looking. He tossed it down into the dirt at Rudd's feet. The sheriff hesitated, then bent to retrieve it, unfolding the page with wary fingers. His eyes scanned the lines, narrowed, then widened. "A marriage certificate," he muttered, "dated 3 months back, signed by a justice of the peace in Santa Fe, witnessed." The preacher stepped forward, peering over Rudd's shoulder. "It appears legitimate, Sheriff. The seal is real." Kane dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with soft thuds. He walked forward, ignoring the rifles now leveled at him from half a dozen directions. The crowd parted instinctively, as though his presence carried a heat they did not wish to touch. He stopped at the foot of the gallows and looked up at Eliza. "You ready to ride, wife?" he asked quietly. Eliza stared down at him, heart hammering against her ribs. She had never seen this man before in her life. Yet something in his gaze, steady, unblinking, told her he was not lying, or if he was, the lie was one she could live with. She gave the smallest nod. Kane turned to the hangman. "Cut her down." Otis looked to Rudd, who stood frozen, certificate still in hand. The sheriff's jaw worked, but no words came. Finally, he jerked his head once. Otis drew a knife and sawed through the rope binding Eliza's wrists, then her ankles. She rubbed her hands together, feeling the blood rush back in painful tingles. Kane climbed the steps, boots heavy on the wood, and lifted the noose from around her neck with surprising gentleness. Then, without another word, he scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing and carried her down. Gunfire erupted behind them, angry, scattered shots from men who could not accept this sudden theft of their spectacle. Kane spun, one arm still cradling Eliza, and fired twice with his free hand. A man in the crowd screamed and fell, clutching his shoulder. Another dropped his rifle and ran. Kane reached his horse in 3 long strides, swung Eliza up into the saddle, then vaulted up behind her. He kicked the black into a gallop, and they tore out of the square, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Eliza clung to the saddle horn, wind whipping her hair, the taste of dust and gunpowder sharp on her tongue. Behind them, Dry Creek shrank into the distance, its gallows standing empty, its people left with nothing but questions and rage. They rode hard for the open plains, the sun finally breaking over the horizon in a blaze of gold. Eliza felt the steady beat of Kane's heart against her back, the strength of his arms around her. She did not know who he was, or why he had come, or what price this rescue would demand. But for the first time in days she breathed free air, and the noose that had waited for her at dawn now hung forgotten in the square, swaying in the empty morning light. They rode without speaking for the first 2 hours, the black gelding stretching into a ground-eating lope that carried them far beyond the reach of Dry Creek's rifles and righteous anger. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill until sweat darkened the horse's coat, and Eliza's torn dress clung to her skin. Kane kept them to the low draws and arroyos, avoiding the main trails where posies might ride. Every so often he twisted in the saddle to scan their back trail, pale eyes narrowed against the glare. Eliza sat in front of him, his left arm looped loosely around her waist. She had not yet asked his name beyond the single word he had given the sheriff. She had not asked why he claimed her, or how he had known to arrive at that exact moment, or what the forged certificate in his pocket really meant. Questions felt like luxuries she could not yet afford. Survival came first, then understanding. For now she concentrated on the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the solid heat of the man at her back, and the simple miracle of still drawing breath when the noose had been so close. By mid-morning they reached a shallow canyon, cut into the red rock mesa country. A thin trickle of water ran along its floor, fed by a spring higher up. Cottonwoods grew in a ragged line, their leaves whispering in the breeze. Cain reined in beside the stream and swung down first, then reached up to lift Eliza from the saddle. Her legs buckled the instant her feet touched earth. 3 days in irons, and terror had left her weaker than she realized. He caught her elbows, steadying her without comment until she could stand on her own. "Water first," he said. She knelt at the stream, cupping cold water in her hands and drinking until her stomach ached. When she finished, Cain handed her a strip of jerked venison from his saddlebag. She tore into it with small, careful bites, surprised by how fiercely hunger had returned, now that death no longer loomed immediate. He watched her eat, then turned to unsaddle the horse and rub it down with a scrap of blanket. The animal nickered softly, nosing his shoulder in thanks. Eliza wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and studied him openly for the first time. Up close, he looked younger than the scar, and the cold eyes suggested perhaps 30, no more. His hair was dark blonde, sun-bleached at the ends, worn longer than town fashion allowed. The scar that marred his face had been stitched poorly years ago. The thread had left tiny white cross marks along its length. His hands, when he worked the cinch, moved with the economical grace of someone who had spent most of his life handling weapons or reins or both. "You're not from around here," she said at last. It was not a question. "No." "Then how did you know about me? About the hanging?" He finished with the horse, draped the saddle blanket over a boulder to dry, and came to sit across from her on a flat stone. "Word travels fast when a woman's set to swing for murder," he answered finally, "especially when the dead man was rich and the woman had no kin to fight for her. I was 2 days' ride north when I heard, rode straight through. That still doesn't explain the paper, the marriage certificate." A faint, humorless smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've carried 6 of those over the years. Different names, different dates. Justices of the peace in border towns don't ask too many questions when a man slides silver across the desk and says it's urgent. The seal's real, the ink's fresh enough, it was enough to make them hesitate." Eliza felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment settle in her chest. Not a husband, then. A stranger with a clever lie and faster gun. Yet the disappointment surprised her. She had spent the ride wondering what kind of man would claim a condemned woman as his own. "So I'm free because of a forgery," she said quietly. "You're alive because of it. Freedom's something you'll have to take for yourself." She looked away toward the narrow mouth of the canyon where the land opened onto endless plain. "They'll come after us. Sheriff Rudd won't let this stand." "They'll try," Cain agreed. "But Pazes move slow. They argue, they drink, they second-guess. We don't." He stood and began checking his weapons. The motions were automatic, almost meditative. Eliza watched him, noting the way his shoulders stayed loose even as his hands moved with lethal precision. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have picked any lie. Why claim me as your wife instead of your sister or a cousin?" Cain paused, thumb brushing the hammer of one colt. "Because a wife has rights a sister doesn't. A man can kill for his wife, and the law will mostly look the other way. A man can kill for a sister, and they'll still hang him if the story doesn't hold up. Marriage is the oldest shield there is." She absorbed that in silence, practical, mercilessly practical. And yet there had been something in the way he lifted the noose from her neck, the careful way he carried her down the steps, something that did not fit the cold arithmetic of his explanation. They rested only long enough for the horse to drink and graze, then mounted again. This time Eliza rode behind, arms around Cain's waist to keep from falling. She felt the hard planes of muscle beneath his shirt, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The intimacy of it unsettled her, yet she did not pull away. Trust, she decided, was not required. Necessity was. They pushed south and west through the afternoon, crossing alkali flats where the heat shimmered like water, and the only sound was the crunch of hooves on salt crust. Toward dusk, they reached a line of low hills studded with pinon and juniper. Cain chose a sheltered hollow among the trees. hidden from the plain below. He built no fire, too much risk of smoke, but spread his bedroll and offered her half. "Sleep if you can," he told her. "I'll watch." She lay down, exhaustion pulling at her like a tide. But sleep would not come easily. Every rustle of wind through the branches sounded like hoofbeats. Every distant coyote call sounded like a man's shout. She turned her head to watch Cain, where he sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness. "Cain," she said softly. He glanced at her. "Is that your real name?" "No." She waited. After a moment he added, "It's close enough." She nodded, accepting the boundary. Then, because the question had been burning since the square, "Have you done this before? Ridden into a town and taken someone from the gallows?" "Once." His voice was flat. "Didn't end well." "What happened?" "The man I came for was already dead. They'd hanged him at midnight instead of dawn. I killed 3 deputies getting out. Been running ever since." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "And now you've added murder to the list for a woman you don't even know. I shot to wound today. Nobody died in Dry Creek because of me. Yet." She closed her eyes, trying to find sleep. Images flickered behind her lids. She wondered how long they could run before the past caught up. She wondered what would happen when it did. Sometime before moonrise, she drifted into uneasy slumber, lulled by the soft sounds of the horse cropping grass and the faint metallic click of Cain checking his revolver one last time. When she woke, grey light was filtering through the trees. Cain was already saddled and waiting. He handed her a canteen and the last of the jerky. "Riders on our trail," he said without preamble. 6, maybe 7. Moving careful. They're still a ways back, but they're coming." Eliza took the canteen with steady hands. Fear was there, sharp and bright, but it no longer paralyzed her. She had stood on a trapdoor with rope around her neck. Everything after that was borrowed time. "Then we keep moving," she said. Cain studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. He swung into the saddle and offered his hand. She took it, settling behind him once more. This time her arms circled his waist without hesitation. They rode out of the hollow as the first true light of day touched the hilltops. Eliza pressed her cheek against Cain's back and felt the steady drum of his heart. She did not know where they were going, or how long they could outrun the noose that still waited in Dry Creek Square. She only knew that for the first time since the night Harlan Whitaker died, she was choosing her own path.